want to invite you just to reflect for a minute and ask yourself this question. Can you remember the last time you woke up in the morning, went into your bathroom, looked in the mirror, and thought to yourself, wow, I feel fresh, motivated, inspired, and rested? Chances are, if you're like most people I talk to, that is a rare memory. And rather, they spend most of their lives feeling depleted. I'm here to tell you, we are facing an epidemic, a life-threatening, brain-paralyzing, heart-destroying condition I call the doing disease. The perennial, incessant need to keep doing, keep moving, keep achieving. French philosopher Blaise Pascal said, all of man's problems come from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone. As someone who has suffered extensively from this doing disease, I can tell you I was terrified of being still, of being quiet, and of being alone. I was afraid of not having an agenda or a goal, or of being out of control. The good news is there is a cure. And it's not something that only some of us can have access to, or even something all that new. It's called rest. A seemingly simple concept, and yet I would argue it is radically countercultural, incredibly life-changing, and tremendously performance-enhancing. I've been on a profound personal journey the last few years exploring this idea of rest, and recently completed my master's researching the impact of rest on the performance of leaders. The world is a siren call. The world is calling from you more, more, more. Honestly, even just reading this quote stresses me out. But this quote is one that came from the hundreds of interviews and surveys I did with leaders from a diverse range of industries. 53% of people responded that they do not factor rest into their weekly schedule. The main barriers that they identified was that they feel guilty, they don't know how to, they can't switch off their mind and disconnect from technology, and that they actually are just simply overcommitted in every aspect of their life. 62% of people said that their workplace cultures actually don't value or are negative towards the very notion of rest. So when I talk about rest, people think, well, that's great, you're encouraging me to sleep more, maybe take some more vacations. And don't get me wrong, sleep is terrific, and it's a really important part of this conversation. And who doesn't love a great vacation? But truth is, I think rest is so much more than just this. From an academic perspective, I defined rest as the renewing of one's depleted physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual reserves. It's about deep internal renewal that occurs to our whole self. The physical and mental side, but the emotional and spiritual part of us also. From a personal perspective, I've really come to understand rest as being a space away from doing, from people-pleasing, from competing, from performing, from controlling. It's a space where I have the freedom to choose where I'm going to invest my energy. And I find it to be a starting place, a place I can actually move out of into the world. So you might ask, well, why does any of this matter? And I think we only have to watch a day's worth of news to recognize that our world is crying out for more unifying, more inspiring, more sustainable, and more impactful leadership. And let's be honest, leadership is demanding. It is a hard slog. It's a hard slog that inflicts wounds and injuries and often leads to burnout. And whether you carry a title or not, I think when you're leading well, whether it be as a mum or a dad, a student, a scientist, a teacher, a nurse, a consultant, a coach, a president, a commanding officer, or simply as a friend, when you are leading well, you are giving of yourself, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and mentally. And whenever you're giving of yourself, you need a corresponding season or space to actually refuel and replenish what's been taken out of you. I think we need to stop applauding leaders who are working 18 hours a day and who are burnt out and start promoting and encouraging and affirming a culture of rest. We need to slow down in order to speed up. I know this might sound crazy, but we need to slow down in order to accelerate. I think in Western culture, we pride ourselves on being busy. And yet, interestingly, in the Chinese language, the word busy is made up of two parts. The first word is for the word heart, and the second is for the word killing or perishing. Now, this might not be fully linguistically correct, but just think about this for a minute. Heart and killing, or killing heart. When we are busy, when we have that doing disease, when we're running fast, we are literally killing our hearts. We are killing the very essence, the inner part of our being. I've learned that I just can't be all things to all people always. And I find it so fascinating that we're called human beings, and yet honestly I think so many of us treat ourselves like human doings. Mahatma Gandhi said, there has to be more to life than simply increasing its speed. I think athletes get this concept of rest more than most. Michael Jordan, arguably one of America's greatest ever athletes, in his career used to average 38 minutes a game on court playing and 10 minutes a game on the bench resting. For more modern day fans, Steph Curry currently has spent 34 minutes a game on the court and 14 minutes a game on the bench resting. Athletes get this idea that they need to have an on-season and an off-season, and they need to cultivate this rhythm of resting, training, competing. Resting, training, competing. And they realize that both work and activity and rest and renewal are both necessary for sustained high performance. So how did I end up here talking about rest? Because honestly, many of my friends would have laughed a couple of years ago had they known. But at the age of 16, I started my first business. At the age of 20, I co-founded my second, a non-profit social enterprise. Along the way, I played 5 different sports at a state level. Yes, I had a potassium overdose from eating too many bananas. But I went on to university and I studied politics, and then I went on to study law. I was an obsessed high achiever. My identity was completely absorbed by what I was doing. I was addicted. I was addicted to people pleasing. I was addicted to the praise that people would give me from the success. I was addicted to this need to achieve. Honestly, I'm not sure the world thought I was that great, but I'm sure in my own head I thought I was pretty great. But during my 20s, the second company grew pretty rapidly, and we scaled it nationally. And I had the privilege, and it was an immense privilege, to lead an amazing team. Together as a team, we worked with more than 185,000 young people across Australia. I spent 10 years pouring absolutely everything into it. I was finding, however, that the more successful I was becoming in the eyes of the world, the more depressed and alienated and miserable I was becoming. I was incredibly busy doing, but I was killing my heart. Somewhere in there, I had a pretty traumatic event occur. I was traveling for work when I was attacked by a guy with a knife when I was sound asleep in a hotel room. As you can imagine, this was sort of one of those moments where life flashes before your eyes. And miraculously, physically, I was able to escape relatively unscathed, but emotionally and mentally, it took a much bigger toll. I didn't know what to do. So within a week, I returned to work because I thought leaders needed to be strong and be resilient, so I just ran harder and harder and harder. Sometime during the next year, I ended up in Kitgum, Uganda, and while I was there, I sort of had this profound moment where I recognized that change was needed in my life. I had to stop running. So I made the hardest decision I'd ever made in my life, which was to walk away from the company, all in the hope of finding freedom. This was June 2014, and I arrived at Sydney Airport thinking I would take a 19-day adventure before returning home and starting the next chapter of my life. And as I walked through the departure gates at Sydney Airport, I suddenly fell on the ground in the fetal position and started crying uncontrollably. I had no idea what was going on. I had never experienced anything like it. I somehow scrambled and got on the plane. I was the last passenger on the plane. And I cried the entire way from Sydney to Los Angeles. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I didn't even get to enjoy the movies. I just cried the entire way, and that's about 15 hours from Sydney to Los Angeles. The aircrew had no idea what to do with me. I had no idea what to do with me. When I landed, I realized I wasn't okay. And long story short, in typical Australian fashion, I ended up on the doorstep of some friends in Annapolis, Maryland, here in the United States. And here began the most radical year of my life of learning to rest. In my friend's backyard in Annapolis, thanks to their generosity, I would wake up every morning and spend somewhere between 1 and 4 hours first thing sitting here in their chairs in the backyard. As I would sit there, it started out being summer, and I would walk out wearing t-shirts and shorts, and then it got a little colder, and I started layering up a little bit, and then I experienced something I'd never experienced as an Australian, and winter hit, and I walked outside, looking like Michelin Man, wearing 10 layers, carrying 3 blankets, and sitting out there in -degree temperatures and snow. And I know it seemed crazy to most, and honestly, at times it seemed crazy to me. But as I did this, something profound began to occur in my life. Something profound began to occur in my heart. As I sat in the chair and watched the seasons come and the seasons go, I experienced the restorative power of rest. It truly was a spiritual awakening. For the first time in my life, my identity was not in doing or being busy, but it was just in being. And it was incredible. As I sat there, I realized I was able to heal from things that had hurt me. I was able to forgive, people that had hurt me in my life, the guy who had assaulted me, myself. I was able to reflect on my journey and gain perspective from, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I examined my heart. I was able to reflect on what are the things I should be grateful for and apologize for things that maybe I wish I'd done differently. As I sat there, the big questions of life began to boil up for me. Who am I? Why am I here? And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of them. My identity was completely re-anchored in that stillness, in that silence, in that solitude. What I cared about fundamentally changed. In rest, I found healing, I found truth, and I found freedom. And I think I grew as a leader, as a woman, and as a friend. I became more humble, more authentic, and more myself and more whole as a result of that process. And I found those things just simply were not happening in my life when I was running at 1,000 miles an hour. Having now returned to the workplace and being in an environment that does have a lot going on, I find I can still cultivate a daily and weekly rhythm of rest in my life that continues to be the birthplace for me of creativity, of restoration, of perspective, of courage, and of hope. So this was my story, but what about the lives of other leaders? What impact has rest had on them? Well, as a result of my research, those that engaged in a prolonged period of rest all said it had a significant increase on their leadership performance. And it came in 3 main buckets. For impact on themselves, they said they were able to have a lot more purpose and clarity. They were able to have a lot more creativity. They made decisions more effectively and prioritized more effectively. They were more honest and had more integrity in the way they were living their lives. They were less stressed and reactive, and they asked better questions. On others, they found they valued their relationships a lot more, both personally and professionally. They were more humble, they were more genuine, and they were more gentle with people. And on their workplaces, they were able to build more empowered and confident teams and start shifting the culture from one being based on hours worked to being based on productivity. Learning to rest requires practice. It's really about developing and cultivating daily and weekly small habits in our lives. I'm not encouraging you to take a radical year of rest like I did, although I wouldn't talk you out of it. But I do think it is something we can actually start cultivating today. Tomorrow, when you're driving to work, rather than making a phone call or turning on your radio, just sit in silence. Just let your mind and your heart wander. The next time you're on a plane or a train, or you're the first person to a meeting or to a restaurant, just sit. Be observant. Do not pick up your phone. Try going for a long leisurely walk. I used to walk around a field with a friend hour after hour after hour. Or tonight, when you get home from TEDx, take 10 or 15 minutes and just reflect on the day that you've had. What are you thankful for? What would you have done differently? What have you learnt from the experience? I think fear is what stops us having the courage to rest. Fear of falling behind, fear of letting other people down, fear of not getting praise from the world, and fear of coming face to face with ourselves. Rest needs to be fought for. This is a battle, and it's a battle worth fighting. We have to fight the lie that being busy and doing all the time is actually an inspiring act. We have to fight for rest, and it's a battle worth fighting for ourselves, and it's a battle worth fighting for each other. Rest has the power to change ourselves, our leadership, and our lives. Thank you very much.